is the worship pyramid story itself. But I want to intersperse that, like alternate every chapter with a parallel story that may or may not be a simulation of an imagined simulation of the other characters. So I've got the goth scene in Yorkshire in the mid-1980s that I've written. That's one. I've got 2 New Zealand boys that create an online presence about the same time as the goth one, sort of in the 1980s as well, using a precursor modem and a modified game system. And they create this kind of another presence that will be talked about way later in the book. So it's sort of foreshadowing. I've written that one. An obese New Zealand software developer is asked to design an entity that can be asked difficult ethical issues and programmed by the writings of Confucius and a range of other philosophers. And that happens in China just before COVID-19 hits. I've written that one. I wrote all 3 of those actually, like quite quickly after each other. President Nixon meeting Johnny Cash at the White House on the day the Apollo 11 crew lands back on Earth, and Nixon asks the Man in Black to play 2 really hokey songs that are kind of like right-wing, making fun of the lower class, but instead Johnny Cash performs What is Truth. I haven't finished writing that one. I've got to write that one. Another one is a boy living in the Midwest America becomes obsessed about a first-person shooter builder, kind of like Doom, and then mysteriously what he programs starts to reappear in his actual town in reality, and he begins to question reality and simulation, and there's some sort of interface that he's sort of broken into. Haven't finished writing that one, but it's got a good start. A rich rock star returns to Hollywood to discover his life complicated by the influence of a cult leader who wishes to become famous himself. So sort of like influenced by Dennis Wilson and the impact of the Manson family murders. And the leader's song is stolen by the rock star's group, and a murderer's plan to exact revenge. Haven't finished that one at all. A female director in Hollywood is tasked with filming an adaptation of The Worship Pyramid. Amid navigating her first lesbian relationship, coping with an obsessive intern, and the lingering smell in the studio caused by a ritualistic killing of a bear. That one's coming together really nicely. It hasn't finished, but I will finish that one off rather well. I lost count. Was that 6? I don't know. And the one I was writing this evening just before I filmed this is a Jewish brain surgeon living in England who's also a psychologist and a coma researcher, is forced to perform a plunge going into an actual coma of another person, of a powerful Israeli politician from a militaristic and right-wing party after she's nearly assassinated with a bullet to the brain. And so he enters her coma and discovers the entity of Barket. So the themes that are covered in these parallel stories are about illusion, simulation, reality, obsession, idolization, hero worship, cults, rituals, God, and the concept of truth. So just the easy ones then. I'll finish off talking about some reviews of some books I've been reading. Last time I made a video, I said I was going to read The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, and I read this in about a week. I love this book so much. This book was really hard to put down. This book is absolutely phenomenal. It's a real page turner. The formatting is nice and easy. There's lots of like blankness to it, and it's formatted nicely with lots of new chapter beginnings. But it's great, and it also has my partner's notes all the way through it that she made, which is kind of nice because then it's sort of like reading it with her. You know, there's lots of notes that she's made all the way through it, especially in the first chapter, which is like actually the best one. So there's heaps of notes made by her in it. This was super easy to read. I'm kind of semi-obsessed about the Vietnam War anyway. I sped through that. That was really great. That gets a 5 out of 5. And then I got bored, and it's not a super easy read. I mean, like, there's a lot of death and destruction and nasty stuff happening in it. So I wanted something light. So I read Bill Bryson's Notes from a Small Island, and it's about um, sort of reflections of an American living in England and how weird England is, but also the history of England and everything else. And like everything else that Bill Bryson writes, it's very self-depreciating and humorous and almost surreal, very easy to read. Just sort of a comfort book, really. Because I'd read Bill Bryson, I felt kind of almost guilty for not reading a intellectual book. So I found this that I got at a bookstore called The Last Empire by Gore Vidal, who I believe is somehow related to Al Gore, although some people have disputed that. Anyway, this guy is way too smart for me. Like, I just couldn't I just couldn't get into it at all. And I feel really guilty, but I just could not get into it. I didn't even understand what he was talking about. I mean, it's got like some really interesting chapter beginning, like titles: Birds and Bees and Clinton. Like, shredding the Bill of Rights. What was the Lindbergh, the eagle is grounded. There's an interesting one just about like about today's current cultural climate of not being able to really speak exactly as you'd like to. Just, like it's got some concept on Mark Twain's letters, but I'm too dumb to like really get into it, so I couldn't really do it. So currently, I'm actually reading The Giver, which my daughter read really quickly, and she said I'd like it, and she actually said that it would be quite a good influence and inspiration for my book. She already knows kind of what I'm reading and what I'm writing and what I'm interested in, and it's good. I'm kind of like nearly through it now. The last little sort of like finale, I'll probably finish it in the next 2 days or so. It's a well-written book, but it's definitely a children's book. But it's a good children's book. It's well written, interesting ideas, cool concept. It definitely does what I am trying to do better, which is show don't tell. Like, it just goes straight into it, and you got the idea of like the world that the main character Jonas inhabits straight away. And everything's explained by things occurring. There's not much voice of God sort of thing occurring in this, which is good. So he becomes the receiver of memory, and he's trained when he turns 12 or whatever, and he has to. Everyone gets these new jobs, and he gets this really sucky job, or he thinks it's really useless. It was written quite a while ago, like in the mid-90s. So, but yeah, it's good. Apparently, there's a movie. I've never seen the movie, but it's what I'm reading right now. I'm also kind of like semi-reading Prodigal Summer by Barbara Kingsolver. It's beautifully written. I think Barbara Kingsolver is one of the best prose writers. Like, it's just dripping with poetry. Every single page is just so beautifully written. I wish I could read more of her stuff, but I've only got 2 of her books. But I've read this before, and I'm reading it again, which I don't do with too many books, actually. But some of them are just like, I read it once, I was there, I did it, whatever, and I put it on my bookshelf like a little trophy to say that I've read it. But I will reread Barbara Kingsolver any day, because it's like reading. You can read poetry. I really appreciate her way of spinning a yarn, but doing it in a beautiful way. So I'm kind of half reading that. And I was also given The Shed by my friend who is also reading, who's also a writer. And I don't know, it's kind of John Marsden sort of like feel to it, kind of like some sort of war has happened, but it's sort of based in New Zealand. I don't know. I couldn't get into it. I should read it because like it's another New Zealand writer. I think it's the first book she wrote, and he was like, "Hey, you should write something like this, about this big, about this long." They kind of feel for it, and it's like kind of sci-fi, or at least sort of like dystopian. And I just haven't got into it because I've been reading The Giver and stuff. But yeah. So next video, I will talk about wrapping up my parallel stories and what I'm really doing because things are getting a little bit out of control. And I'll also talk about who's above the unseen and the Sauronids and how that fits in with the main story, the main plot. But like now it's coming in July, so I think what I've really got to do is sort of like tie things together a little bit neater, like so I'm halfway through the year. I've written a lot of pages. I think I do need to concentrate on the main story now. I think I've got enough parallel stories now that are interesting, sort of little asides, like they're a simulation. And I think I really need to buckle down and start getting things in order. So I'll let you know how that goes, and I'll tidy myself up before the next video and get myself uh, looking a bit better and feeling a bit healthier and mend myself a bit because now it's the holidays. Anyway, adios.